Aaron's car hummed softly in the backdrop of the old neighborhood, framed by looming trees and the occasional flicker of a streetlight struggling against the dusk. The building he was moving into wasn't particularly noteworthy. A mid-century brick building sandwiched between more modern condominiums. It carried an air of neglect, its facade a patchwork of ivy and peeling paint, suggesting a charm that had long since faded. He parked in the dimly lit lot behind the building, an area crisscrossed with shadows that moved as the evening wind nudged the branches above. Grabbing his key from the dashboard and his backpack from the passenger seat, he approached the weather-beaten door leading into the building. The lobby was a time capsule from another era, all faded elegance and frayed edges. The wallpaper, a once lush pattern of florals, had faded to a dull echo of its former self. The air smelled faintly of dust and wax, the kind of scent that spoke of years of superficial cleanings. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, many of its crystals missing, casting puzzling shadows across the tiled floor. Aaron stepped into the ancient elevator, its gate creaking as he slid it shut. The mechanism groaned under his weight, a grudging complaint as it lifted him toward the third floor. His new apartment, 305, was at the end of a narrow, poorly lit hallway that smelled faintly of old cooking and dry rot. He unlocked the door to his new beginning. The apartment itself was surprisingly spacious, with large windows that looked out over the street below. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors, which creaked softly under his weight. The place was unfurnished, save for a dusty chandelier identical to the one in the lobby, which dangled precariously from the center of the living room ceiling. As evening deepened into night, Aaron set about unpacking his few possessions. The apartment slowly filled with the mundane sounds of moving, cardboard scraping on wood, the soft thud of books being set on shelves, his own intermittent humming. But as he prepared for bed, a strange feeling crept over him, a whisper of something amiss. It started as a murmur, almost like the wind slipping through cracks he couldn't see. Soft, insidious whispers that seemed to rise from the very walls of the apartment. At first, he thought it was just the fatigue of the day playing tricks on his mind. But as he lay in bed, the whispers grew clearer. Closer. Open. Release. The words slithered into his ears, unsettling in their softness. Aaron sat up, his heart thudding painfully against his ribs. The room was silent again, but the echo of the whispers lingered, a presence that refused to be dismissed. The following days were punctuated by the whispers, which seemed to come alive at night. They directed him to move objects around, his coffee table a few inches to the left, his books rearranged by color, his curtains left slightly ajar. Each task felt meaningless, but the compulsion to obey was too strong to resist. Curious and increasingly anxious, Aaron mentioned the whispers to his neighbor, Jamie, during a brief encounter in the hallway. The man's eyes flickered with a recognition that sent a chill down Aaron's spine. "Ah, the whispers," Jamie muttered, shifting his gaze to the floor. "Been hearing them for years. Best to just do what they say. Keeps things simple." Aaron frowned, a mixture of disbelief and fear knotting in his stomach. But why? What are they? Jamie's eyes met his, sharp and piercing. "Don't know. But they're old. And hungry. And it's better not to ask too many questions." Determined to find some answers, Aaron decided to seek out the landlord, convinced that there must be a reasonable explanation. The rental office, however, was as desolate as a forgotten crypt. The door was locked, the room beyond cloaked in shadows. As he turned back, the air grew inexplicably cold, and the faint sound of someone humming the same tune as the whispers brushed past him. Whirling around, he caught the briefest glimpse of a figure disappearing into a stairwell leading down. With his heart in his throat, Aaron approached the stairwell. The whispers swelled as he pushed open the door, the words twisting around him like a living thing. "Below. Come below." Aaron stood at the threshold of the basement door, a chill seeping through the cracks that felt both cold and foreboding. The whispers that had driven him to this point were now silent, as if the act of opening the door was a compliance in itself, rendering the voices satisfied or merely expectant. He descended, each step creaking under his weight, the sound swallowed by the thick darkness below. His only light was the weak beam from his phone, casting long, monstrous shadows against the damp walls. The air was musty, filled with the smell of mold and something faintly metallic that he couldn't place. The basement was vast, far larger than he had expected. It was divided by shelves laden with forgotten artifacts of the building's past, old furniture, boxes filled with residents' left-behind belongings, and disturbingly, several old children's toys that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. As he moved deeper, the air grew colder, and Aaron felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He swung his light around wildly, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing. Only the endless rows of shelves and the deeper darkness beyond them. Suddenly, his foot caught on something soft and he stumbled, catching himself against a shelf that sent a cascade of dusty books and papers to the floor. His heart raced as he pointed his light to see what had tripped him. It was a doll, its glass eyes reflecting the light back at him with a lifelike glint that made him recoil. Gathering his nerves, Aaron continued until he reached what looked like an old maintenance room. The door was slightly ajar, and as he pushed it open, the hinges groaned in protest. Inside, the room was different, cleaner, as if someone had been using it recently. On a dusty table lay a series of old documents and newspapers, and, most disturbingly, a set of small, childlike drawings that depicted various parts of the building and its eerie basement. As he examined the papers, trying to make sense of the hastily scribbled notes and faded photographs, Aaron heard it again. The whisper. But this time, it was clearer, more directive. Help us. Free us. The voice seemed to emanate from the very walls around him. Aaron spun around, flashlight sweeping the room, half expecting to confront someone behind him. But there was only the unsettling echo of the plea. Feeling a mix of terror and compulsion, Aaron gathered the papers and decided it was time to leave the basement. As he made his way back, the temperature seemed to rise, and the oppressive feeling of being watched gradually subsided. By the time he reached his apartment, he was sweating, breathless, and filled with a dread that made him fumble with his keys at the door. Once inside, he locked the door and leaned against it, trying to catch his breath. The apartment was silent, the earlier whispers now gone as if they had never been. But the echo of the plea from the basement lingered in his mind, a haunting refrain that he knew he couldn't ignore. As Aaron tried to make sense of the night's terrifying events, he realized he needed help. And there was only one person in the building who might believe him. Jamie. Jamie froze, his breath catching in his throat as the whispers seemed to curl around him like a cold mist. His apartment, usually cluttered and comforting in its familiarity, now felt like a foreign landscape, shadows stretching across the walls in menacing patterns. "Who's there?" Jamie's voice was barely a whisper, fear threading through each word. The silence that followed was almost worse than the whisper itself. It stretched on, a tangible presence, until, with a suddenness that made him jump, a stack of books tumbled from a nearby shelf, scattering across the floor. Jamie's heart raced as he stared at the fallen books, trying to muster the courage to stand. He reached for the lamp beside his chair, his hand trembling. The light flickered on, casting a weak pool of light around the room. It was empty. No intruders, nothing to justify the creeping terror that clung to him. But the feeling of being watched persisted, oppressive and unyielding. Jamie stood up, a determined set to his jaw. He couldn't let this fear consume him, not in his own home. He began to tidy up, picking up the scattered books, each movement a defiance. As he set the last book back on the shelf, his eyes caught on a small, dusty tome that had fallen behind the others. Curious, he pulled it out, wiping away the layer of dust. It was an old diary, the leather cover cracked and worn. Jamie didn't remember owning it, nor did he recall ever seeing it before. He opened it to the first page, the handwriting elegant but hurried. They whisper at night, the voices of those who once walked these halls. Do not listen. Do not answer. For if you do, they will claim you as their own. A chill ran down Jamie's spine as he read the words. It was too much of a coincidence, too closely aligned with what was happening now. Flipping through the pages, he saw numerous entries, all detailing experiences similar to his own, all ending with warnings and fear. He needed to show this to Aaron, to see if it matched anything in the papers from the basement. Just as he was about to pick up the phone, the whisper returned, louder this time, almost angry. Jamie. It wasn't just in his head. The air around him vibrated with the sound, a physical pressure against his eardrums. Panic rose within him, a stark, blinding terror. He grabbed his coat and keys, the diary tucked under his arm, and left the apartment. The hallway was empty, the other doors closed and silent. But as Jamie made his way to the elevator, he felt the temperature drop, saw his breath misting in the air. He pressed the call button repeatedly, desperation lending strength to his actions. When the elevator arrived, he rushed inside, slamming the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of a shadow moving at the end of the hallway, a shape that was both there and not, flickering at the edges of his vision. The elevator seemed to take an eternity to reach the ground floor. When the doors finally opened, Jamie rushed out into the lobby, his eyes wild, scanning for any sign of pursuit. It was empty, the night clerk nowhere to be seen. He burst out of the building, into the cold night air, the diary clutched tightly. He didn't stop, didn't look back until he was several blocks away, his lungs burning from the cold air and exertion. It was only when he reached a small, all-night diner, the neon sign buzzing overhead, that he allowed himself to pause. Settling into a booth, he took out the diary, his hands still shaking. He knew he couldn't go back to the apartment, not now. Maybe not ever. As he sat there, trying to gather his thoughts, his phone rang. It was Aaron, his voice frantic. Jamie, where are you? I went back to talk about the diary, but you were gone. Your door was open. I'm safe, Jamie managed, his voice hoarse. Aaron, there's something very wrong with that building. We need help. The line was quiet for a moment before Aaron replied, a grim determination in his tone. All right, stay there. I'm coming to get you. We'll figure this out together. As Jamie waited, the diner's warm light a small comfort against the darkness outside. He hoped they were not too late. For him, for Aaron, and for anyone else who heard the whispers and dared to listen. The streets were quiet as Aaron drove through the night. The city asleep and oblivious to the horrors unfolding in the old brick building where Jamie lived. His mind raced with the implications of Jamie's frantic escape and the eerie diary entries that mirrored too closely the events they were experiencing. As he parked near the diner where Jamie had taken refuge, Aaron felt the weight of their discovery pressing down on him. Inside, he found Jamie huddled in a booth, the diary open in front of him, his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. The sense of urgency was palpable as Aaron slid into the booth across from him. Show me, Aaron said without preamble, his voice low. Jamie nodded, pushing the diary across the table. Aaron quickly scanned the pages, each entry detailing an escalating series of encounters with the whispers, culminating in madness or disappearance. It was a pattern that had clearly repeated itself over decades, maybe longer. This is bigger than we thought, Aaron murmured, closing the diary with a sense of finality. We need to go back to the basement. There might be more diaries, more evidence. Something that can tell us how to stop this. Jamie shook his head, a visceral fear flashing across his features. I can't go back there, Aaron. Not after what I felt. It's like the building itself is alive, watching, waiting for us to slip. Aaron reached across the table, placing a steadying hand on Jamie's shoulder. I understand. You don't have to go back. I'll go. I need to know what's at the heart of this, Jamie. If there's a way to end it, I need to find it. After a moment, Jamie nodded, pulling his coat tighter around him. Then at least take this, he said, handing Aaron a small digital recorder. If you find anything, or if anything happens, there should be a record. Aaron pocketed the recorder, his resolve hardening. They parted with a brief, tight embrace. A mutual acknowledgement of the dangers ahead. Returning to the building, Aaron felt the familiar prickling of unease as he entered the lobby. The night clerk was back, casting him a disinterested glance as he made his way to the elevator. As the doors closed, Aaron felt the descent like a physical pressure, a dread that grew with each passing floor. As he reached the bottom, the air turned icy, and the shadows seemed to pulse with anticipation. Before him lay a long, narrow corridor, dimly lit by flickering bulbs that cast more shadows than light. The whispers guided him forward, to a door at the far end, its surface scarred and ancient. With a trembling hand, Aaron reached for the knob, the whispers in his ears now a deafening scream. Open! 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 He turned the knob, the door creaking open on rusty hinges, revealing the secrets held tight by the whispering walls.